Bayangali Alimzhanov made a huge contribution to strengthening the cultural ties of the two fraternal peoples by promoting the Kyrgyz epic Manas. For this work, he was awarded the Order of Friendship personally by the President of the Kyrgyz Republic, Sadyr Japarov. The author of more than 50 books, poet, writer, storyteller and playwright, Bayangali Alimzhanov told us about his life and work answering the questions of the Culture Talks program. Not so long ago, you completed the translation of all parts of the Kyrgyz epic Manas into Kazakh. You have been the reciter of this epic for 40 years and suddenly decided to translate it. How did the idea come to you, or was it a contract work?
Алдымен айтатын болса, Манас эпосы бұл бүкіл әлем білетін эпос қой жүр. 3 бөлімнен тұрады.
First, the Manas epic is known all over the world. It consists of 3 parts. The first tells about Manas, the second is about his son Semete, and the third describes the son of Semete, Seytek. This is a huge epic. You're right, I have been reciting this epic for 40 years, and all this time the thought of translating it and publishing book never crossed my mind. Moreover, in the 60s, with an introduction written by our Mukhtar Oazov, Manas was already translated into Kazakh and published in 4 volumes. We once read it in this edition. We knew that this epic had already been translated, and we thought that there was no need for it. In 2019, a major meeting of the Kazakh-Kyrgyz intelligentsia was held in Bishkek. I recited Manas there, and the Kyrgyz elders were delighted. I returned to Kazakhstan after this event and continued to perform this epic for a week. On December the 1st, I decided to write the introduction of the epic on paper. I thought then, why not recite it completely in Kazakh? Of course, the most part needed to be translated from Kyrgyz into Kazakh, and only in some places I could tell in my own way. Thus, I came up with this idea, and on December the 1st, I started translating and completed on February the 5th, having spent 67 days on this work. Then I called the president of the International Turkic Academy, Darkan Kadirali, and told him everything. He was very happy and said that this was great news, promising that they would publish this book. Last year it was published. The book was sold well as the Kyrgyz and Kazakhs really liked it. I'm really wondering why this idea never came to me for over 40 years. When I was surprised by this, I sat down and wrote the beginning of it in Kazakh, and then moved on to translation. Then on March the 17th this year, I started working on Semete and Seytek. I thought, after all, this is a trilogy and I must complete this work. So within 43 days on April the 28th, I completed the translation into Kazakh. It turned out that there is no epic Manas that could be easy to read for a Kazakh, because the epic translated by famous poets in the 60s, with a foreword by Mukhtar Oazov, consists of 4 volumes. It was translated from a consolidated version collected by Kyrgyz researchers in 1958. Firstly, it was very voluminous. It contains approximately 100,000 lines, and it would be difficult to find all these 4 volumes for today's youth. This, as they say, is a bibliographic rarity. Secondly, I do not think that modern youth will find the time to read it in full. They will not have enough patience, because it is very long. Sometimes the events happening in it change very quickly, and it is difficult to read. I wanted to make it easy and accessible, and describe Manas, Semete and Seytek parts in one book. I wanted to write meaningfully and beautifully, and include all 4 volumes of the old translation into one book, so that young people have the opportunity to read it in full. You said that Manas epic was previously translated into the Kazakh language. Then what is the peculiarity of your translation? That's right. I did not see any reason to translate it because this has already been done before me. At one time, this was already translated by eminent poets, and Mukhtar Oazov wrote a preface. We read Manas in childhood. It was available in our village. The second and third books were published in 31,000 copies. The first part was released in 47,000 copies. The book came to us together with the Kazakh heroic epics, and we read it. We liked it very much, probably because the characters were similar to our Kazakh ancestors. But at the same time, everything was somewhat different. We were in such an interesting world. Now look, it was translated into the Kazakh language as an epic, but I translated the epic not only from 4 volumes of 1958, but I also took texts from other excellent authors, such as Sayagbai Karalayev, Saganbai Orozbakov, and many others. Therefore, the book that was published last year by the Turkic Academy differs from the book published in the 60s. For example, in my translation, there are episodes that were not included in that book. There are scenes that were not described in the first edition. But I added them. The difference is that every reciter has his own feature. A person who has simply learned an epic is not considered a reciter. Only the one who knows Manas fully and tells it in his own way is called Manas narrator. See? Therefore, in this book, I composed some chapters in my own way, added the missing parts and translated it virtually anew. Accordingly, my translation has many differences. The most important feature is that I made very long lines shorter, but at the same time, like the Kazakh zhirshi, I told them in the form of prose. This is the most important feature. I did not leave a single fictional narrative. I translated them in verse, and I shortened the long episodes, military actions or wars, repetitions. After all, the Kazakhs say al-Qissa, beginning, introduction. Following this style, I briefly and prosaically presented this epic. Compared to the 4-volume edition, the peculiarity of my work is that it was shortened and published in 1 volume. That is, I shortened it 4 times. This was done to save people's time in modern living conditions and to make it interesting for children to read. As a result, now we have the epic Manas in the Kazakh language in such a form. As a storyteller, Jibek, what Kazakh epics do you know by heart? We often do not understand and do not appreciate legends. In fact, all the heritage of our ancestors reached our time through legends and storytellers, Jibek. They are, if we speak exaggeratedly, walking encyclopedias. When there was no light in our village and the candle was burning out, my brothers told me, Bakosh, they called me so in childhood, read it. So in the dark, with my eyes closed, I recited arqılы Batyr by heart. My favorite epics which I knew by heart were Alpamiz, Koblandı. Also, I recited arqılы Batyr with pleasure. There are beautiful lines. I will cite one episode as an example when the Kalmyks captured arqılы Batyr. But he had a Kalmyk friend named Karamergan, who took arqılы as a pledge and brought him to his village. Taking as a pledge meant putting your head on the line. Bringing him home, he freed our Batyr, fed him with meat, and allowed him to rest. He gave Batyr a sharp knife and hid it in the foot, in the sole of arqılы Batyr's shoe. Imagine what a big sole it was that one could hide a knife in it. The Kalmyk said that with that diamond knife he would cut the prison lock. He gave him fried meat of a whole ram so that he could not be hungry on the road. At night, arqılы Batyr noticed the horse of his friend Karamergan tied in the yard and decided to run away. So, when he was getting dressed, he heard the wife of his Kalmyk friend saying to her husband, "Calling him a friend, you set him free. What will you do if arqılы escapes? You will remain deceived, and as a pledge, instead of a Kazakh, you will lose your head." That is what the woman said. Kalmyk Karamergan replied, "There is no hero who can compare with arqılы. Even if he escapes, I will go instead of my friend." Hearing this, arqılы returned to his seat and said, "I decided not to rip him out of my heart and not to do this thing." Hearing these words, I stayed, so that the man is not humiliated in the eyes of his wife. They were the worthy people. He met his death, but he still escaped from captivity, cutting off the iron doors with a sharp knife given by the friend. These lines touch the heart, and then you understand that you want to tell everyone around that our ancestors have such golden words. In Soviet times, we recited such epics by heart. Jibek must be not only smart, but also a jack of all trades. It seems to be about you. You are a master of the art of improvisation, storyteller, songwriter, and playwright. Each profession implies a huge amount of work, including written books and films. Are you doing all this to discover your capabilities? In short, this is the grace given by God, and I like everything that I do. I want people to listen and understand my poems and stories, itis, ancient legends and folk epics. This artistic world is my spiritual mission. I cannot remove at least one of these things from my life. When a parent with many children is asked which child he loves more, it is difficult for him to answer. Likewise, in my case, these are my spiritual children. This is my world. Now you are writing works in Russian. How did this idea come to you? I was born and raised in the north of the country. I grew up in Kokshetau, in the town of Stepnyak. I spoke purely Kazakh. I learned Russian with the children of the Virgin Lands workers who came to our village. I knew only spoken Russian, but thanks to the Russian language we read world literature. This is a big advantage. When I was in the 10th grade, one teacher told me, "You write essays and dictations well, but there are certain difficulties in speaking. Therefore, when you are alone, read books in Russian aloud." The first 2 weeks my tongue hurt, but I practiced, and then eventually I spoke fluent Russian. Now I give the same advice to my Kazakh brothers who want to learn the Kazakh language. You have to sit down and read in Kazakh. Even if it doesn't work out, you have to do it by breaking the tongue. Finally, you will start speaking. I say this to young people. However, I had no thoughts to write books in Russian. I worked at Kazakh Film as an editor of documentaries, and there I had to write scripts in Russian. When Mukhtar Magawin's book Alasa Piran was nominated for the state prize in the 80s in Almaty, I wrote an article in the newspaper Kazakhstanskaya Pravda in Russian. Then they said, when we heard that a Kazakh would write in Russian, we were worried that we would get tired of correcting, but we only fixed the endings in 4 words. Ahmedi Iskakov then said to Mukhtar Magawin, "This guy writes sophisticated in Russian." When Muzaffar Alimbayev turned 60, I wrote an article for the Ogni Alatau newspaper. I quitted writing in Russian there. In 2000, I thought a lot that I was reading the epics of my ancestors by heart and reciting the Kazakhs all this. But when they read in Russian, make films in Russian, everything changes beyond recognition. They change everything in their own way, adjusting to their points of view. It hurt my self-awareness. When I read foreign authors, I noticed that they present historical facts in a very interesting and romantic way, so that youth will be interested in it. I wondered why I didn't write like that. Then I started writing works in Russian. I took as a basis those legends that I love. For example, the legends about Abelai Khan and other Kazakh legends collected by Shokan Velikanov, Mashhur Jusup Kopeyev, Shakarim Kudaiberdiuli. I tried to tell Russians and the whole world the legends about my ancestors in Russian language. Thus, I began to write the story Abelai Khan and his Batirs. It is interesting for children, teenagers and adults. There are very different legends. They are all historical. At this time, the filming of the Nomads movie was planned. I then thought that all legends would be shown there, but it didn't turn out as we expected. In 2015, I finished my work and published the book Abelai Khan and his Batirs in 5,000 copies. This book was translated on the internet, and it is available in all Russian internet libraries. I was very glad that I was able to tell the legends of our ancestors to the whole world, but they were not published in Kazakh yet. Friends are joking. Who would have thought that we would translate Bayangali Alimzhanov's works into Kazakh? But it will be published in the future. This comes from an inner spiritual request. The work Let Me Live is the heartfelt cry of the Kazakh poet. All the troubles in the world are born from the loss of justice and conscience. People should awaken. With these thoughts in mind, I wrote a semi-fantastic work. This is very interesting. This is creativity when you purposefully do not think what you would write. It is born by itself. I would like to tell you one interesting thing. I cannot translate into Kazakh my works written in Russian. Do you believe it? It comes in Russian. Thus, the novel The Tale of a 100-Years-Old Steppe was born. The novel was written as a story of a centenarian's life from 1900 to 2000. It is based on the tradition of Kazakh oral tales, such a natural alloy with elements of fiction. It contains Kazakh myths that describe the worldview of the Kazakhs. It was also published in Moscow by the publishing house Художественная литература with a foreword by the prominent Russian academician Georgy Vladimirovich Prakhin. Sometimes people take offense at me because I write in Russian. My dear, we have always written and will write in Kazakh. But on the global scale, what are we? What will we show? What civic position will we adhere to? This is a question that worries any writer, I think so. Thus, I, a Kazakh writer, got the opportunity to tell the world about my story. And I'm very happy about that.
Сіз кезінде Жұлдыз журналында жұмыс істеп жүрген кезде біраз
When you worked for the Joly magazine, you were engaged in literary criticism. If you are asked to prepare a critical review of all the literature that has been written since gaining the independence, what question would you raise first? And what would you talk about?
Мен сын жазбас едім. Өйткені біз өзі қайта совет заманында сынды сынағанды түсініп дұрыс қабылдай білетін едік. Сын мәдениеті болатын. Қазір ол жоқ бізде. Өйткені мен не үшін сынаймын? Мысалы, сені мен қазір құрметтеп сыйлап отырмын.
I wouldn't do that, because in the days of the Soviet Union, we were able to correctly perceive criticism. But now, we have lost that ability. Why should I criticize? Now I respect and appreciate you. Here you bring me one of your works, and I will criticize it. Would you like it? This will get you in trouble, firstly. Secondly, in general, this is not mine. When we were returning from Kyrgyzstan, Abish Kaklikbayev said, Bayangali began to write criticism, but then he realized that this entails intrigues. He stopped in time and went in another direction. We need criticism for the development of society, the development of art. Let the criticism be truthful. Mukhtar Awazov said, we need the truth and we shouldn't be afraid of it. Imagine that you go to the doctor and he speaks beautifully and calms you down, saying that everything is fine, there are no illnesses. In fact, he sees your illness but does not tell you about it. We leave and we think, what a good doctor he is. How he cheered us up. We are in euphoria for several days, but the disease remains. And the second doctor sits gloomy, saying where you have troubles and how to treat it all. He hurts you with his words, cuts you with a scalpel if necessary, but heals you as a result. Therefore, there must be real, honest criticism. Most importantly, society needs it. Since we are already talking about this, I will give you an example. In one of the historical films, either in Amangaldi or Botagoz, the Governor-General of the Russian Empire comes to the Kazakh steppe accompanied by his retinue. Kazakhs meet him and give kumis, mare's milk, with the words that it is a steppe medicinal drink. He takes kumis, sips and spits it out, saying, "Oh, what a sour thing." But after all, kumis did not cease to exist only because the Governor-General did not like it. Kumis remained kumis. Therefore, there is always a lot of controversy in fiction. Perhaps what you and I didn't like is actually a brilliant work. Could it be that the piece we liked is actually bad? There is a very fine line here. For example, you shouldn't throw your work away just because someone didn't like it. This is our problem. If someone says that Darkan's poem is bad, we are ready to forget it. It should not be. There is a whole world behind this. We do not know how to see this. We do not want to. I do not regret that I left it, but my critical view remained. My friends, poets, used to come to me asking to read and express my criticism. I did not feel sorry for them, for friendship, face to face. But for example, there is no need to criticize aloud the published work. That's going too far. Secondly, I don't even have time for this. I am a person who devoted the whole life to creativity. Now write children's literature, because I have to. Our children yearned for Kazakh literature, fiction, beautiful literature. Sometimes I get very upset about the fact that children do not have poems that they would remember and tell later all their lives. Well, there are some, but very few. I love to create something important. Summing up, I prefer not to criticize other people's works, but to create.
Сондықтан сөзімнің түйіні тоқ өтерін айтқанда, біреудің жасаған еңбегін сынап мінегеннен гөрі, өзімнің қолымнан келгенше еңбек жасағанды жақсы көремін.
Has anyone criticized your works?
Болды, болады ғой, ол сынақ, одан мен қорықпаймын, өйткені көріп тұрам, ол мүлдем басқа жақтан өзінің.
Of course there was and will be. I'm not afraid of this because they do it on the basis of their knowledge. As they say, they take a one-sided view. Your work, for example, is about something completely different. Sometimes they say bad words, unfair ones. When I was younger, I was angry, but now I look at it in a completely different way. If you don't like the work, it doesn't mean that it is bad. If in fact the work has its own meaning and its own character, then this is a real work. There was a lot of criticism for my films. When I was filming my movie, I heard the most negative reviews, even obscene ones that I have never heard in my life. But there were also those who praised. There will always be a lot of controversy. If I was afraid of criticism, I would never set foot on this path and would not write books. Each piece of art is a separate universe. Everything is for the judgment of the people. Some will like it, some will not. This is a pattern.
You
can do a lot, and we have already talked about this. What else would you like to do?
ондай ол мен бұл жерде біреуді қайран қалдырайын я елең етсейін деген.
I have no purpose to surprise anyone. Therefore, what is given to me by the Almighty, I must give to my people and humanity. As it settles in my soul and heart, so I must convey all this to people in their original form. Accordingly, I cannot say that I will do this or that. I write several works at once. Sometimes one is written easily, but then at one moment everything stops and I move on to something else. Sometimes I start writing poetry. It's interesting that it happens. It's like you are sitting, writing poetry in Kazakh, and then suddenly episodes of the novel in Russian come to mind, or suddenly I start reciting Manas. Such interesting situations are happening. Do you keep your works inside for a long time?
Бұл қызық сұрақ, ол іштей ұзақ пісіргенде былай, өзі кейде бір жарқ етіп туа қалады. Тұтас шығарманы мен.
This is a very interesting question. Not that I keep it. Sometimes it is inspired in one moment and fully. I feel it. Also, it happens that 2 lines of verse come, and that's it. It can be left so for 2 years. Nothing comes. This all happens by itself. I do not forcefully correct or write anything. Sometimes you walk for a long time and plan to write something. In my youth, a lot of interesting things came to mind, but I did not have time to put it all on paper, and time was running out. Maybe that's about right. I often see a full-length movie. I have a very violent imagination. Everything comes quickly, and sometimes you don't have time to fix it. Therefore, it all comes from somewhere and then requires hard and long work. It's like giving birth to a person. Washing him, cutting his hair and nails, performing a ceremony for 40 days, and only then showing the child to the world. Creativity is also similar to this ritual. I have been working on my works for a long time. I once burned 28 notebooks with manuscripts that I didn't like. Perhaps a lot of good things burned out, but I thought it was necessary. I think poetry and writing starts with self-immolation. If you pray for every piece you write, you will not achieve good luck. In this regard, I am very strict with myself. I write everything that is born in my soul, but I am very self-critical.
келген дүниені жазып тастаймын, содан кейін барып қайтадан екіше біріктеу жағынан келгенде оған өте қатты қараймын.
Thank you for this interview and good luck in your work. Thank you.
Ал біз бүгінгі бағдарламаны аяқтаймыз. Бұл бағдарлама
Dear viewers, watch this interview on the Qazaq TV channel on YouTube. Subscribe and like. See you.